no proposals to make about Cyprus, not at all.
You don't think you could help break the deadlock?
I don't think so. You must realize that I'm a very modest person who doesn't wish to barge into other people's affairs. Or I can help it.
You have a reputation, sir, as a mediator.
No, I don't wish to mediate. If my general friendly attitude helps people, well, it's all to the good. But sometimes this kind of interference is not good. I'd rather not push in unless I'm quite sure that something good might occur. Anyhow, so far as Cyprus question is concerned, I'm going to say nothing about it.
Did you hear anything from the Greek government that might help?
What you mean by the Greek government? I was received by the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister there, and we had a friendly chat. Not sort of government function, very officially. Naturally, they talked about various matters, and Cyprus was mentioned.
What results do you expect, sir, from your visit to Washington and also to Tito and Colonel Nasser?
You seem to take life much too serious. I'm not always learning and teaching, and I'm just playing about too sometimes.
But you as a mediator, so we have so many problems. Will you be playing about, for instance, when you meet Marshal Tito?
Oh, certainly, I hope so. It's a lovely place, Brioni, where I'm living.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Voices from Periphery, it's my honor to welcome you all to today's lecture titled Jawaharlal Nehru and the Challenge to the Idea of India, at a time when historical memory is under constant negotiation and ideological contestation. Revisiting the foundational visions that shaped our nation becomes not just important, but urgent. Today's lecture invites us to reflect deeply on the life, ideas, and legacy of Jawaharlal Nehru and the many challenges that confront the democratic, secular, and pluralistic ideas he stood for. In this context, I would like to mention an important and timely contribution to this ongoing discourse, Professor Aditya Mukherjee's recent book, Nehru's India, the most definitive book on Jawaharlal Nehru, past, present, future. This work offers a powerful and historically grounded defense on Nehru's vision, unpacking his belief in scientific temper, inclusive nationalism, anti-colonialism, and economic self-reliance. Professor Mukherjee not only situates Nehru as a key architect of independent India, but also examines the systematic attempts to erase or distort his legacy in the contemporary moment. The book reminds us that Nehru's India was not just a political project, but an ethical and intellectual one, rooted in dialogue, dissent, and deep faith in democratic institutions. In many ways, today's lecture continues that vital conversation. Now I will invite to today's host, Srijoni, for brief introduction to sir, and then we will continue. Srijoni, up to you.
Thank you, Ayush. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yes, you are audible.
Good evening, sir. Sir, I'll just provide a brief bio note of you. May I proceed? Okay. Good evening and namaskar, everyone. I am Srijoni, representing Voices from the Periphery, and it is both a profound privilege and an honor to welcome you to our 75th lecture, Jawaharlal Nehru and the Challenge to the Idea of India. This evening holds special significance to us as we are joined by one of the most distinguished historians of modern India, Professor Aditya Mukherjee. He is admired not only for his formidable scholarship, but also for his quiet dignity, generous mentorship, and lifelong commitment to secular and critical thought. A former professor at the Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and former director of the Jawaharlal Nehru Institute of Advanced Study, Professor Mukherjee has devoted several decades to nurturing generations of students and thinkers in India and abroad. His presence in the Indian academic landscape has been marked by an extraordinary blend of intellectual brilliance and heartfelt humility. His research spans some of the most vital themes in Indian history: colonialism and imperialism, the Indian national movement, capitalist development, and the political economy of post-independence India. He has contributed extensively to understanding how India's freedom struggle emerged not as a resistance to foreign rule, but also as a movement with profound ideological, social, and economic dimensions. He has consistently challenged sectarian and reductionist readings of history, offering instead a nuanced, people centered perspective. Among his most celebrated works is the widely read and respected India's Struggle for Independence, published by the Penguin Press in 1988, co-authored with Bipan Chandra and Mridula Mukherjee. The book remains an essential reading for students and researchers alike, presenting the freedom movement as a secular, democratic, and mass based process. Its companion volume, India Since Independence, published in 2008, critically examines the political, economic, and social developments in post 1947 India, covering themes such as land reform, planned development, communalism, and democratic institution building. Professor Mukherjee's monograph, Imperialism, Nationalism, and the Making of the Indian Capitalist Class, The Case of Tata 1920 to 1947, published by Sage in 2002, is a landmark contribution to the field of economic history. In this work, he explores the complex and often contradictory relationships between Indian capitalists and British imperialists, using rigorous archival research to shed light on how class interests shaped nationalist strategies. His book, RSS, School Texts and the Murder of Mahatma Gandhi, The Hindu Communal Project, published by Sage in 2018, co-authored with Mridula Mukherjee and Sucheta Mahajan, is a deeply concerned and urgent intervention in the current debates on history, memory, and communal politics. The book analyzes the ideological roots of Hindu communalism and critiques the distortion of history in school textbooks, tracing the long arc from historical revisionism to tragic assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. It is a courageous and timely work that underscores the historian's responsibility not just to the past but to the ethical demands of the present. Students describe him as a teacher who listens more than he speaks and who offers encouragement and critical feedback with the gentleness of someone who truly believes in the power of learning and dialogue. We are truly privileged to have him with us today, and we look forward to an enriching session. Thank you.
Shall I begin?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much, Srijani, for such a wonderful introduction. I don't think I deserve it. But since you said that I love to listen, which is true, I hope I will have some opportunity to listen to your comments and questions at the end of the talk. Since the bulk of the evening is going to be my talk, unfortunately, I would love to hear how you people respond. See, to begin with, let me thank Voices from Periphery and particularly Pallab Vairagya, who had got in touch with me and invited me for the talk. But I must congratulate you, the whole group Periphery, for choosing Jawaharlal Nehru as the subject of my talk at a time when it is fraught with a lot of danger. I'm not exaggerating. It takes courage today to even talk about Nehru and Gandhi and the national movement. I'll give you an example. As recently as mid-February this year, a book fair which was displaying books by Gandhi and Nehru was not permitted in a university in Uttarakhand because the student wing of the RSS, the ABVP, raised an objection and the book fair was cancelled. I myself was invited by a central university in Delhi. In this case, I don't want to name and shame, to deliver a talk on Nehru and the making of modern India. And the day before the talk, I got this desperate message from the organizers saying, "Sir, can you just drop Nehru's name? You can say what you like, but the title of the talk must go as The Making of Modern India." Nehru's name is not even to be mentioned in a talk in the capital of the country. So you can imagine, there is a demonizing of not only Gandhiji and Nehru, but of the entire national movement that is going on. And this is not something that we can take, we cannot not take seriously. Do remember that it was the demonizing of Gandhiji, demonizing, in Hindi they call it Daityakaran. This creation of this evil personality of Gandhiji that went on for months before his assassination, done by the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS and several quote-unquote Hindutva groups at that time, which eventually led to his murder. His murder was just waiting to happen. And when the assassination did happen, the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha people actually distributed sweets, saying that an Asur Vad has occurred. After all, the demon has been murdered. Even today, again, we are not talking only of what happened 70, 75 years ago. Even today, a sitting MP in Madhya Pradesh, Sadhvi Pragya, called Gandhiji's killer Godse as a Deshbhakt with no consequences. The demonizing of Nehru occurs today at an unprecedented level, and as the talk goes on, you will see why this demonizing is necessary. Nehru is blamed for virtually every pothole in the country. A recently removed website, which was titled Dismantling of Nehru, the Last Viceroy of India, was a heavily funded website which went year by year by year. It's a very massive website which was aimed at denigrating one of the greatest sons of India. There are books like it used to be for many years called the 97 Blunders of Nehru, but every year they keep on adding some. The last I looked at it, it was called 127 Blunders of Nehru. So the blunders keep getting added. But an organization like the ICHR, the Indian Council of Historical Research, which is supposed to be promoting research, put up a poster to celebrate 75 years of independence, and there was no Nehru in it. The first Prime Minister of the country for 17 years was absent from this poster, and in his place was the poster of Savarkar, who called himself Veer, and who, as you know, once he was released from prison after he begged for mercy from the British, once he was released, he played essentially the British game of dividing the Indian people on the basis of religion. These are not, one could go on and on giving you examples. There's a textbook in Rajasthan under the BJP on contemporary India, which included the national movement and post-independent India, had no mention of Nehru. He did not exist. Despite his 30 years of his struggle against the British, 9 years of them in jail, he does not even appear. And fictional characters who actually supported the British appear as the nationalists. As I said in the beginning, it is not only the denigration or the demonization of Nehru and Gandhi, it is the denigration or the non-acceptance of the entire Indian national movement that is going on. Let me give you examples. The RSS chief, Bhagwat, in January this year, said that real independence came with the Pran Pratishtha of the Ram Temple in January 2024. Before that, it was not independence. The real independence came in 2024. Similarly, the Prime Minister, almost giving out a dog whistle, says that with the Pran Pratishtha, 1,000 years of foreign rule has ended. Now, the British, as you know, ruled no more than 200 years in India. So who are these foreigners? So the obvious reference is to Muslims. So all Muslims become foreigners. I mean, this is, as you know, the definition of who's an Indian that was brought in by Savarkar. That is, those whose Pitri Bhumi and their Punya Bhumi are in this country can only be called Indians. And since the Punya Bhumi of the Muslims and Christians could not be in India. They are outside India. They are all foreigners. I mean, of course, it is an idiotic definition, because by that definition, every European is a foreigner in their own country, the British, the French, the Germans, etc., because their Punya Bhumi lies in the Middle East, not in their own country. But then, such is the wisdom that is being spread these years. We used to think that this wisdom was spread only by, starlets like Kangana Ranaut, who you may remember said that real independence came to India in 2014 with Modi. Then when people asked what happened in 1947, she said, "Wo to bheek mein mili." That is, we got it as beggars, It was 1947 was only an extension of British rule, she says. Real independence only came with Modi. Now, what does this do? With one sweep, you've converted our entire national movement, from Dadabhai Naoroji to Tilak to Gokhale to Patel, Bhagat Singh, P.C. Joshi, P. Sundaraiah. I'm naming the entire, Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, the entire spectrum, left, right, center, all those who fought the British now become beggars. And for such wisdom, what does the starlet get? She is nominated, given a seat, and is now an MP, Member of Parliament from Himachal Pradesh. It is significant that those who denigrate the national movement and its stalwarts like Gandhi and Nehru are precisely those who actually collaborated with the British. They did not join the national movement. There are no major struggles in which any of their heroes are involved. They were the collaborators, as I said. At the peak of the national movement in 1942, the Quit India movement, the Hindu Mahasabha and Muslim League joined hands to form governments together, cooperating with the British. They attack the national movement, the actual Indian national movement, for two reasons. One, because they now masquerade as the nationalists. They are the ones who they say they are the nationalists, and anybody who critiques them are anti-national, right? So they want to occupy the nationalist space. In order to occupy it, they have to deny that space to the actual nationalists. That is number one. The second reason, and very important reason, is because they stand for values which are totally the opposite of values our freedom struggle stood for. Now, what are those values that the Indian freedom struggle stood for? Values which Rabindranath Tagore called the idea of India. What is the idea of India? I'll very quickly go over these values, which was the core of our freedom struggle, because all of them are threatened today, and I will discuss how each one of them is threatened today by the current forces who now deny the national movement itself. There are essentially 5 core values of the Indian national movement. Number one, India must be sovereign, it must be independent, and it must continue to, once it is independent, it must continue to fight imperial domination globally. So it is not just that you become independent and after that you colonize your neighbors. That sovereignty, anti-imperialism was a fundamental value. You cannot, as the freedom struggle leaders could not and did not stay silent as we do today when massacres in Gaza happen, or when Israel just attacks Iran, its sovereignty is questioned. We are silent. Now, this was inconceivable. At a much weaker position in the 1950s, India spoke up. Nehru spoke up on issues of the Korean War, on Vietnam, on the recolonization of the Belgian Congo, etc., etc. Wherever imperial domination occurred, the Indian people spoke up. And when often the criticism was made that who are you, a poor country with a begging bowl going around in the 1950s, who are you to lecture to the whole world? Nehru reportedly said that we may be poor, but who has told you that the poor cannot have a voice? In other words, we had a voice in the global sphere. We did not become junior partners to the imperial powers as we are tending to become today. Second core idea of the national movement was democracy. The future India would be a democracy. This was a core idea from the very beginning of our national movement. As early as the 1890s, Lokmanya Tilak is talking of adult franchise. Adult franchise is still decades away anywhere in the world. Most of Europe in the 20th century is still debating whether women can have the right to vote. And the country where every middle-class Indian now wants to run to, the United States, was in the 1960s still having civil rights movements. Movements which were saying that the blacks must have a right to vote. At that time, they didn't even have the right to sit next to you or travel in the same bus. Right? But here, the Indian national movement from the 19th century onwards said democracy was a central value. With democracy came the third element of the idea of India, which is secularism. Because you could not be a democracy if you were not secular. That's why throughout the national movement, the two phrases were used together, secular democracy. You always talked about secular democracy. Just as these were the two words which were kind of conjoined, just as communalism and loyalism got conjoined, because all communalists were also loyalists. Now, so secularism was a very fundamental idea of the Indian national movement. Secularism meant being inclusive. It meant celebrating diversity, in which, and this I want to emphasize, this was a unique achievement in world history at that time. As you know, modern nation states emerged in Europe from the 17th, 18th century onwards. And the fundamental principle on which modern nation states emerged was one language, one religion. Catholic France, not even Christian France, Catholic France, Protestant England, unification of Germany on the basis of language, unification of Italy on the basis of language. France was a multilingual country before the French Revolution. It was flattened out. In this situation, the Indian nationalist imagined a nation which would celebrate diversity. As many religions, as many languages, the more the better. In fact, the British said, when the Indian national movement began to emerge, they said, how can you be a nation? You are only a geographical expression. South Asia, as we are still called. You cannot be a nation because you have every conceivable language and religion in that region, right? Because this was the European model. It is this European model which has been borrowed by our Hindutva forces these days. The slogan of Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan. One language, one religion, one country. This whole notion, this homogeneity is a foreign notion, and if not struggled against, it led to the Hitlers and the Mussolinis. In Europe, that denouement was prevented because of the democratic movements that emerged there. We are now imitating a foreign European version which was not our nationalism and calling it our nationalism. So the third element, therefore, was secularism, and inclusivity, where you celebrated diversity. The greatest Bengali poet, the greatest Marathi writer, the greatest Urdu writer, the greatest Telugu thinker were also the greatest Indian nationalists. They were complementary. They were not seen as contradictory to each other. So this was a great achievement, as I said, in world history, to imagine a nationalism which was different from how nation states emerged elsewhere in the world. The fourth element in the idea of India, or in the vision of the freedom struggle, was its pro-poor orientation. I choose my words carefully, not socialist, not communist, though they were powerful currents in our national movement, the socialists and the communists, but the consensus was on a pro-poor orientation. Right from the moderates, from Dadabhai Naoroji's time. Dadabhai Naoroji's first book is Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. You read Dadabhai Naoroji, R.C. Dutt, Rana Day, any one of the early nationalists, Surendranath Banerjee, you will find that the focus of their critique of the British is that British rule is causing poverty in India and therefore they must be removed. All right. Now, this notion of a focus on the poor is carried forward in the 20th century, primarily by Mahatma Gandhi, with his focus on what he called the Daridra Narayan, and then by Jawaharlal Nehru, the left wing of the Congress, and then by the socialists and the communists. But there was an overall consensus, as I said, that the poor must remain part of the imagination of the future India. And lastly, the fifth major element in the thinking of the freedom struggle was that the future India would be based on what Nehru called a scientific temper, based on modern values, not on superstition, obscurantism, traditional rituals, etc. It would be based on a modern scientific basis. Now, the important thing is that on all these five aspects that I have discussed, sovereignty, democracy, secularism, pro-poor orientation, and the scientific temper, there was a consensus in the wide spectrum which our national movement was. Consensus from the moderates to the extremists to the Gandhians to the Congress socialists to the communists to the revolutionaries, Bhagat Singh. Just think of anybody who participated in the national movement. There was a consensus on all these five items. The only people who did not agree with it were the loyalists, those who were loyal to the British, the princes, many of the princes, for example, the landlords, the zamindars, and the communalists. And that is why you can understand why the communalists today must attack the idea of India, the vision of the freedom struggle, because they stood against it from its very inception. Their whole idea is very different from the idea of freedom struggle. I will, since I'm going to talk on Nehru, I'll describe why Gandhiji chooses Nehru as his successor, and I'll give you a brief survey of how Gandhiji and his chosen successor Nehru fought for these values, what we have just now described. As early as 15th June 1942, Gandhiji in an AICC meeting said the following. He says, people say Jawahar and I are estranged. He says this is baseless. And he, as was typical of Gandhiji, he used very beautiful imagery which even the ordinary person could understand. He said, you cannot divide water by repeatedly beating it with a stick. So this notion of you're trying to divide me and Jawahar is not going to succeed. You see, this is very important. You will realize, because if you were to look at the discourse that is being promoted by the current regime, you would find what are they promoting? All the time they're trying to find differences between the national movement leaders. Difference between Bose and Nehru, Gandhiji and Bose, Bhagat Singh and Gandhi, Patel and Nehru, and so on and so forth, as if the national movement was all about fighting with each other rather than fighting the British. They had no clue. Petty minds cannot even begin to imagine that how big minds can differ and yet be able to fight together with integrity and friendship towards each other. Nehru writes his entire autobiography in the 1930s in prison, which anybody can see is a critique of Gandhi. And yet, Gandhiji says that now I'm quoting him, he says that we cannot be separated by just beating water with a stick. And he said, I've always said, not Rajaji, that is C. Rajagopalachari, nor Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, two of the tallest and most close people to Mahatma Gandhi, great intellectuals. He said, not Nadaji, not Sardar Vallabh, but Jawahar will be my successor. When I am gone, he will speak my language too. Now, the reason why Gandhiji says that is he sees Nehru as not only one of the biggest fighters of all the 5 values that I mentioned of the freedom struggle. During the struggle, he fought for them, and he saw Nehru as the person who, after independence, will be the most capable in implementing these ideas into the post-independence India. As it happened, with the murder of the Mahatma less than 6 months after independence, and Patel died in 1950, the burden of implementing the idea of India fell on Jawaharlal Nehru. In fact, since Patel was died, but Raja Gopalachari, as you know, continued. He had differences with Nehru. He broke away from the Congress and participated in the Swaraj Party, etc. But at Nehru's death, Rajaji has a beautiful condolence. I don't have it right in front of me, otherwise I would love to read it out to you, where he says that, where is the comparison between me and Nehru? I have had several differences with him, but he has, I have differed with him, he says, for 11 years. But, Nehru is about 1100 times greater contribution to the making of modern India than I did. So there are people who understood this. It is not that Gandhi was being, promoting somebody because he liked that particular person as it is made out to be. Gandhi was only recognizing the fact of what people wanted in India and what Nehru was at that time. So as I said, as it happened, it fell on the shoulders of Nehru to implement the idea of India after independence. And he took on this task, this Herculean task, in a manner which one can be proud of. One must remember, when one does a critique or analysis of anybody, and in this case Nehru, we must use what economists call the concept of the initial conditions. That is, where is one starting from? What are the initial conditions from which Nehru has to start the process of building modern India? And here again, I would like to quote Rabindranath Tagore. Shortly before he died, he said that, the British will one day have to leave India. But when they do, what mud and filth will they leave behind? What is the mud and filth in Tagore's language that was left behind? Something like 3 million people died of famine just 4 years before independence. 30 lakh people dead of famine. Average life expectancy, it may surprise some of you, average life expectancy, that is how many years you were likely to survive on an average, was less than 30 years in 1950. You would die in your 20s on an average. That means the wealthy and well-fed may last longer. But what about the poor? They must have been dying at much, much younger ages. 84% of Indians were illiterate. 94%, 92% of women were illiterate. These are just some examples. I mean, I have in my book that was referred to given you statistics to show that, how per capita income was actually falling for the 30 years preceding independence. Every year, the per capita income was falling, agricultural productivity was falling. Nehru is acquiring, as I said, the mud and filth left behind by the British. But most important in this mud and filth was that the British left behind a country deeply divided. Lakhs of people dead at independence, millions becoming refugees. So from this, to build a secular, humane, modern India was indeed an enormous task. The biggest challenge to the idea of India came at independence itself. period 1946 to 48 I've described as a Holocaust-like period. It starts with the Calcutta killings in 1946, followed by the killings in Noakhali, followed by the revenge killings in Bihar on a massive scale. Killings of Muslims even in the rural areas occurs there. Then the killings in Punjab, the partition riots, and which the riots which led to about 500,000 people killed and 6 million refugees. These are not small numbers that came in. And on top of this Holocaust-like situation, that's why I'm describing it as a Holocaust-like situation. On top of this, the father of the nation is murdered by a Hindu communalist. Nehru didn't see the murder of the Mahatma just months after independence. He's murdered, as you know, on the 30th of January 1948, just a few months after independence. He didn't see the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi as the act of some madman. He said it was part of an organized effort by an organization to do a coup. The language he uses is that it was an attempt at a coup. That is, to change the nature of the state. Because the state that came into being as a result of the national movement was naturally going to have the values of the national movement. It would be a democratic, secular state. But the organization that he's referring to, in this case, the RSS, he said, is trying to use the situation of the 46-48 period of communal frenzy to use that situation to change the nature of the state and make India into a Hindu Rashtra. This effort to convert, to utilize the frenzy, the mass frenzy, to which, of course, these forces contributed a great deal to create the frenzy. And as Nehru said, it was not only Mahatma Gandhi's assassination. The idea was to assassinate several other leaders and create a complete frenzy and a chaos, and out of that chaos, create the Hindu Rashtra. What we can learn from Gandhi and Nehru is how they fought these forces like a lion, a lesson which we need to learn when we are faced with what I called the current evil times. We need not feel hopeless, because in a much worse situation, you will see what our national freedom fighters did. What did Gandhiji do? Gandhiji was in Noakhali when the Noakhali riots began in November 1946. This is the time, as you know, when perhaps one of the biggest events in world history is happening. That is transfer of power from the British to India. Indian colonialism in India is about to end. It is this which, as you know, after India becomes independent, almost the empires almost all over the world begin to crumble, one after the other. In the next 5-10 years, it's almost gone, the traditional type of empires. So it is a very major event. And when the negotiations for the transfer of power is going on, 46-47, the leader of that movement is sitting in the remote villages of Noakhali, walking the streets of Noakhali, never sleeping more than a night in a village, walking to the next one, and in a hostile situation with a government which is dominated by the Muslim League. In a hostile situation, when he would walk from one village to the other, they would throw human refuse and broken glass on his path. And he responded by taking off his sandals. He was punishing himself. The crucifixion of the flesh, as it is called. He was punishing himself. So what kind of India have I created? That our own people go at the throats of each other and kill each other. So when Gandhiji went off to Noakhali, tried to prevent this horrible communal situation, the leaders of the national movement went to Gandhiji and said, Gandhiji, when will you come back? How long will you be there? He said, as long as it takes. And do remember, he stayed in Noakhali from November 1946 till February 1947 for 4 months. When this negotiation for the transfer of power is occurring. What use, he said, is this freedom if the soul of India is destroyed? The soul of India for him was Hindu-Muslim unity, a humane people. The soul of India was not one going at each other's throat. So therefore, for him, that was not important. So Gandhiji led by example. And as you know, in 1947, after independence, the Muslim League leaders, people like Suravardi, etc., feared that there would be a massive killings of Muslims in revenge for the 46 killings in Calcutta. And Suravardi approached Gandhiji and said that you must prevent this. Gandhiji said, yes, provided you walk with me. So and stay with me under the same roof. So Suravardi and Gandhiji stay under the same roof and walk the streets of Calcutta at Independence Day, and not a single shot was fired. And that is when Mountbatten said that Mahatma Gandhi was a one-man boundary force. He was able to prevent what he says our troops, last number of our troops could not prevent in Punjab. Gandhiji's last fast also, as you know, again weeks before his assassination, was on this question. He said, unless the Muslims, as you know, thousands of Muslims had been thrown out of their homes in Delhi, they had to be kept in refugee camps, and their houses were being destroyed, mosques were being destroyed, and Gandhiji said, unless this carnage stops, unless every Muslim comes back to is allowed to come back to his home, the mosques are repaired, I will die. And such was the pressure of Gandhiji's fast at that time that even the RSS had to agree to stop their activities. And he broke his fast. But then he got murdered after that. The point I'm trying to say, okay, so while Gandhiji is doing this, what is Nehru doing? I'll give you the other side. When the Bihar riots occur, the counter killings occur in Bihar, Nehru lands up with his entire cabinet, in Bihar, with Sardar Patel, Rajendra Prasad, Maulana Azad, Jayaprakash Narayan, Kripalani, etc. The whole cabinet lands up in Bihar, and he says, we will stay here until we contain the riots. And they did, within a few days. Riots which had spread to the villages, they were able to do that. In other words, they were not afraid of the M word, the Muslim word, as our leaders have now become. The defense of the minorities, and the Muslims in this case, was an important part of the survival of India's democracy. You could not, as I said, be a democracy and say that we are Democrats, but we are Democrats only for Hindus. The Muslims can take a walk or jump to the ocean or migrate to Pakistan. That is not a democracy. That's what a fascist state is. And therefore, one big lesson to learn, that you cannot be afraid of losing the Hindu vote and therefore we will not mention the Muslim word, as happens today. One big lesson to learn. 40 kilometers from Delhi, a soldier's father is dragged out of his home and lynched in the streets on the mere suspicion of what kind of meat he has in his fridge. No cabinet went there. Nothing like that happened. Not even a flying visit on a helicopter. So, these are indeed very different times, and therefore we need to learn from our past. The most important thing that Nehru did was he took away the low-hanging fruit. What the RSS Hindu Mahasabha thought was the low-hanging fruit of converting this situation into one where they could now demand a Hindu Rashtra. Muslim Pakistan has come there, now we will have a Hindu Rashtra. Nehru led a massive movement to prevent that from happening. He turned the first general election, the 1951 election, into a virtual referendum. Do the people of India want the mirror image of Muslim Pakistan in India? Do we want a Hindu Rashtra, which is a mirror image of Muslim Pakistan? Or do we want a democratic India? He traveled something like 40,000 kilometers and he had no 8,000 crore plane, as you know. And he addressed about 35 million people directly as I'm talking to you. 35 million would mean at that time 1 out of 10 people. And it was not Nehru alone. I'm using Nehru as a shortcut here. It was the nationalists at that time who rose up, especially after Gandhiji's assassination, to say that, look, this is what communalism leads to. You kill your own, the greatest of your own. And the result of this first election, where the people voted for the first time, was absolutely amazing. The communal forces were decimated. All the Muslim League, as you know, had gone over to Pakistan anyway. The Hindu communal forces, the Hindu Mahasabha, Ram Rajya Parishad, Jan Sangh, which is the predecessor of the BJP, all put together got only 6% of the votes and only 10 out of 485 seats. They had been pushed into a corner despite communal temperatures being so high in the period just 3 years earlier. So within 3 years of the partition riots, to have a peaceful election and then an election where the people choose a democratic country and not a Hindu Rashtra is what I would call the greatest achievement of our Indian national movement. Communalism was pushed back, but unfortunately it was not extinguished. And Nehru was among the first to note that. If you read the letters to the chief ministers that he writes after independence from 47 onwards, 47, 48, 49, particularly in this period, he is repeatedly warning of the fascist danger of the RSS. As you know, more than 20,000 RSS people were put in jail. They were arrested and put in jail by Sardar Patel and Nehru. Sardar Patel was the home minister at that time after Gandhiji's assassination. And then over time they were released because Nehru did not believe that is the way, that you do not put people in jail and that is the way to build a consensus. But he said, what are the lessons we can learn from the first election? And this is something I think we can learn from a lot. After the 1951 election, where the communal forces have been defeated roundly, Nehru says these are the following lessons. He says, number one, he says, when we fight directly, the elections show when we fight communalism directly, we win. When we compromise with communalism, we lose. He says, in other words, do not compromise with the communal forces for short-term gains, some electoral gains, because people's minds are communalized, therefore you compromise with the communal ideology. He said, do not do that. In fact, recently, the president of the current Indian National Congress, Mr. Khadge, made a very interesting statement. He said, you cannot lick poison. Poison is poison. You cannot say, I'll just lick it a little bit and I won't drink the whole of it. If you lick poison, you're dead. So in other words, the similarity is, the parallel is that if you compromise with communalism, then your system is ruined. And this lesson that Nehru warned against very early, repeatedly, was not taken. In the 1960s, in the provinces, you found various political parties joining hands with the communal forces in order to beat an opposite secular party. So among secular parties, if there is a contest for power, then one section joins hand with the communalists in order to beat the other section. This happens at a national scale during 1975-77. In fact, in the JP movement, before the emergency, JP, as you know, relied to a very large extent on RSS cadres to build the JP movement. And when he was critiqued, because after all, he was one of the greatest socialists at one point of time, a great national freedom fighter. When he was critiqued that why do you join hand with fascists, the RSS, JP said, if RSS is fascist, I am also a fascist. In other words, gave him a clear certificate. And then when the Janata Party was formed, it allowed the Jansangh and the RSS to merge with it. So for the first time, people who were untouchables after the murder of the Mahatma became acceptable in national politics. The same thing was done again in 1989. And this time even the left parties joined hands with the BJP in order to overthrow the Congress. And the BJP in that 99 elections increased their position from 2 seats to 80. And after that, the rest is history. In other words, this advice of Nehru that you do not compromise with communalism was not taken to create at a great cost to the Indian nation and to the values of the national movement. Another advice that Nehru gave was that you must use state power to combat communalists, and simultaneously with use of state power, you must do an ideological offensive. Neither of this was done. As you know, despite the 2002 Gujarat riots, which showed what communalism can do, mass massacre of Muslims was done. The whole world talked about it. The United States even denied a visa to Modi on this ground for participating in this or allowing this to happen. Despite that, in 2004, when the secular parties came to power, we had a gap from 2004 to 14 when the BJP was not in power. Nothing was done about it. As you know, must have seen this or heard of this movie called Nobody Killed Jessica. Nobody destroyed the Babri Masjid. Nobody did the Gujarat massacres. Nobody was punished. Nobody was held responsible. In other words, state power was not used to combat communalism. Neither was ideological battle done. The RSS schools continued. Our book shows that what poison is fed to young minds, 7, 8-year-old, 9-year-old children, and what kind of poison is fed to them about the other communities, the Christians and the Muslims. Nothing was done about that. Despite the slogan in 2004 elections was that we are going to de-Talibanize education. We are going to secularize education. Nothing was done. And the result is today, open calls are given for committing genocide on the Muslims. You must have seen these videos of these sadhus getting up and saying that, buy arms, do not waste your money on movies, this, that, and the other. Buy arms, arm yourself, buy knives, buy swords, etc. And, so many must be killed, and so on and so forth. And it goes on. To such an extent that now the whole world is commenting on it. I'll come to that later on. But even like in the manner in which this bulldozer has been utilized now to punish Muslims, and it was done again for less than 40-50 kilometers from Delhi in the Mewat region, where a trumped up situation was created, and then the houses and shops of Muslims were demolished, where the suo motu action was taken by the Punjab and Haryana High Court, and said that what appears to be done, what appears to be happening is a state-sponsored genocide, a state-sponsored effort at wiping out a community. This is what the High Court itself said. Now this can happen, has happened, because we did not put up a fight when it needed to be. We then come after communalism to the other element, democracy, of the other element of the idea of India. As I said, for the national movement, democracy was a critical, non-negotiable element. And the nationalist leaders, from Tilak down to Bhagat Singh, Tilak, Gandhi, Bhagat Singh, they all made it clear that democracy means a free press, civil liberties, freedom of association, and respect for the opposition. These were, I don't have the time to describe each one of them, but this was made very, very clear. If you look at the 1931 Karachi Resolution, which is often seen as the precursor of the Constitution of India, all of this is mentioned there. That future India will have the free press, civil liberties will be protected, freedom of association will be there, and etc. As Gandhiji put it, he said, freedom of speech is, again, in his inimitable language, he said, freedom of speech is the water of life. Have you ever heard of water being diluted? So it is something that you cannot dilute. Gandhiji also said that freedom of association is truly respected when bodies of people are allowed to assemble even to discuss revolution. Look at the contrast today. As I said, that you cannot even address a university meeting if the title has Nehru in it. That is your freedom of speech. What we have done to the press is a joke, and it's almost impossible in large parts of India, including the national capital, to hold a demonstration. Gone are the days where you could have those massive demonstrations in the boat club in front of Parliament. You can't. Section 144 almost immediately. You're often not even allowed to hold meetings in your own premises, like happened during the G20 meeting in Harkishan Singh Surjit Bhavan, which is CPM's own office space. And there they were holding a meeting. The police came and disrupted it. They said, you can't. So freedom of speech, the right to association, freedom of expression are under grave threat. Nehru said, I'll come back to this issue shortly. Nehru said that democracy was a non-negotiable value. He said, I won't give it up for anything. However laudable the objective, however good the objective is, I'm not going to give up democracy. And that is why, and one must realize this, I hope you people realize this, that is why after independence we did not have a civil war. Most revolutions have ended up followed by a civil war. The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution didn't have a civil war, but it ended up with 20 to 60 million people dead. That is because a certain course of action was being pushed through. Nehru refused to do that. And that is one reason why after independence, the socialists and many of the communists, for a brief period at least, dissociated from Nehru. They said that he's not using his personal power to push through radical reforms. He said, I will not push it through unless I can get the majority of the people to accept. He was one of the first in the world, along with Antonio Gramsci, to make this break from what has been called Stalin Marxism, a distortion of Marxism that occurred in Stalin. Nehru says in the late 1930s, socialism must be the socialism of 90%. It is not going to be the dictatorship of the proletariat, a small minority making a revolution. It will have to be, you'll have to carry people with you. And that is why our post-independence developments, we were able to have a situation where there was no civil war. There was a Nehruvian consensus on how India would move after independence for the first 3-4 plans. Just a few examples. Nehru's commitment to the free press was absolute. No cartoonist had to go to jail or a stand-up comedian before they cracked a joke, as happens today. You are going to crack a joke and therefore you can be arrested. Or like the Kerala journalist, he is going to report on a rape that has occurred in Bihar, he's arrested. Now that was inconceivable. In fact, the joke, the saying is that Nehru would tell Shankar, who used to do a lot of cartoons on him, that be as open and as critical as you want, you know. And Nehru famously, when he found that not enough opposition was coming up against him, he actually wrote against himself with a pseudonym in the newspapers, saying that this is wrong with Nehru. So that was the faith in, as he said, that there is no democracy if there is no opposition. I'm quoting him. He says, I want a strong opposition. He's now saying this in June 1950. He's just emerged as the first prime minister at the peak of his power. You know, he doesn't need to listen to opposition voices. He says, I want a strong opposition. I do not want an India to be a country in which millions of people say yes to one man. As you may have seen often happens in parliament, when somebody begins to criticize the government, the opposition all gets up together, the ruling bench gets up together and says, Modi, 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 Modi. That's the answer to criticism. So this is what Nehru is saying, that I don't want, one strong man deciding everything for the rest of the people. For millions of people, they should all say yes to one man. Nehru says, most important, academic institutions must be free. He said, and as a professor, having spent most of my life as a teacher, I must discuss this with you. He said in December 1947, just after independence, at a university, at a convocation, he said, a university, he describes what a university should be. He said, university stands for humanism, for tolerance, for reason, for the adventure of ideas, and for the search for truth. If a university discharges their duties adequately, then all is well with the nation. All is well with the nation and the people. That is what he says. But again, as if anticipating the current situation, he says, but if the temple of learning itself becomes a home of narrow bigotry and petty objectives, how then will a nation prosper or a people grow in stature? It is as if he can witness what is happening to our university system. They're attacked, beginning with the best, my own university, which has been rated the best for years and years here, including by the government itself. Students picked up, put in jail for asking questions. Umar Khalid remains in jail without a charge sheet. It's over 4 years. My student, he's directly my student. So is Sharjeel Islam. So was Anirban. Faculty harassed, their pensions threatened. They're not being given permissions to even go abroad, even to receive major awards. The attack is very similar to what Hitler did to Germany's best university at that time, the Frankfurt University. And this process has been very well described by Peter Drucker, the very famous management guru. You must have heard of him. Peter Drucker was in Frankfurt at that time, and he had to escape. He had to run away because the attack on the university occurred in such a vicious manner that he fled to the United States. And then he writes about this, and he says why the attack occurred. Because he said that this was Germany's most free-thinking, most progressive university, and it had to be put down. Now, this is being done in India as if following that model. And it's not only JNU, it is Jamia, it is AMU, it is Jadavpur. I mean, one can just go on counting the number of universities which are under attack. The result is that India is no longer considered a democracy. Beginning from, and the main reason why it is not considered a democracy is the attack on civil rights, on the press, on minorities, on NGOs, civil society movements. The Videm Institute of Sweden, the US Freedom House, and the Economist Intelligence Unit, these are the three major institutions which measure democracy. They are not even calling India a democracy anymore. From a flawed democracy, the term that is being used today for India is an electoral autocracy. And when a global comparison is made, they are saying, the VDEM Institute says, we are only just one step away from a full-fledged autocracy. In the Freedom of Press Index, you won't believe it, we are 161 out of 180 countries. We are sandwiched between Russia and Venezuela. And these, so less said about democracy on this, the better. Coming to the values of independence and sovereignty. Nehru at independence found that India was in a neo-colonial situation. What is a neo-colonial situation? You have political independence, but you are dependent on the very forces from whom you got your political independence economically. That is what was India's situation. You were independent, but in order to grow, you need to invest. In order to invest, you need machinery. You had nothing. You did not produce anything. 95% of even machine tools, your pliers and wrenches, had to be imported in the 1950s. So you're inheriting a situation where you're totally dependent on the advanced world. From 1945 onwards, industrial delegations went out from India all over Europe and America, trying to negotiate purchase of machinery or lending of machinery for the post-independence planned growth. So we were completely dependent. Nehru is able to reverse this. I'm going to spend 2-3 minutes on this because this demonizing of Nehru by the right wing, not only the communal right wing, but the economic neo-colonial right wing, people like Tirthankar Roy and others, is also equally damaging. Now they say that the Nehruvian years, for example, Tirthankar Roy and Meghnad Desai have made the statement that the first 40 years of India's independence were wasted. These were the bad years. If only we did not have Nehru, where we would have reached, etc. Now this is ahistorical, if not stupid. At independence, as I said, he sees that India is in a neo-colonial situation, and therefore he creates with Mahalanobis a model, the famous Nehru-Mahalanobis plan, which tries to compensate for this deficiency. And I'll just give you one set of 3 figures to show the tremendous change that occurs over the period. At independence, you have to import almost all the machinery to make any investment. In other words, for any growth, you were totally dependent on the outside world. By 1960, because of the Nehruvian policy of building up the heavy industries and capital good industries in India through the public sector, by 1960, you had to import only 43%. And by 1974, you had to import only 9% of your machinery. 91% you were making yourself. This is what got India true sovereignty. This is what enabled India to have an independent foreign policy. This is what enabled India to lead the non-aligned movement. 100 countries which refused to be the junior partners of either of the two superpowers. This is in a Cold War situation. When the world is being divided, Nehru is able to stand alone and lead the third world into a position that we will not ally with either of you. We shall remain independent. But to do that, you have to not just translate the word and say Atmanirbhar and say that we are Vishwagurus. You have to transform your economy. And that is what happens in India. By 74, as I said, 9% only had to be imported. Nehru's model of development was also another unique model in world history. So those who are denigrating without adequate knowledge of history must look into this question. How does industrialization occur anywhere in the world? How does the transition to modern industry occur, or what technically is called primitive accumulation occur? It occurs either on the backs of the peasantry and the working class. Look at the conditions of the working class in Dickensian England. Did they have any working class rights? What was the enclosure movement? What is the condition of the peasantry? 50% land tax for Japan's industrialization. How does the United States industrialize? Slavery. The Nehruvian model of doing this transition with democracy and sovereignty was unparalleled and has remained so. There are so many countries in the world which became independent. Almost all of them over time either abandoned democracy or became junior partners of the imperial powers. Neither of these two were chosen in India, and that is one of Nehru's greatest contribution, an independent path of economic development with democracy and sovereignty intact. Lastly, on this question, Nehru also anticipated the knowledge revolution, something we tend to forget, especially the beneficiaries of the knowledge revolution today. If you look at the first plan onwards, 1950s, almost any institution of learning that you know of, the IITs, the IIMs, the Bhabha Atomic Research Center, the National Physical Laboratory, the National Chemical Laboratory, just think of almost any institution that you can, then the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, all of them were conceived in the 50s and 60s. The first nuclear reactor goes critical in 1956, as early as that. This is when the scientific area was virtually left barren under the British. But it is not only these kind of institutions that came up. The Sangeet Natak Academy, the Lalit Kala Academy, the National Council of Advanced Economic Research, the National Institute of Design, the Film Institute. So Nehru did not think that these were not important. So the anticipated of the knowledge revolution was the total anticipation, scientific as well as in the area which is outside the physical sciences. The result was that today's India is able to participate in the information revolution that is happening in the world. As you know, that more than half our GDP is today produced by the service sector. And what is the service sector based on but knowledge? Your balance of payments are today balanced. We have a huge trade deficit. That is, our exports are much lower than our imports. It is made up because of the knowledge that we export to the rest of the world and the remittances that we get as a result. But the people who are benefiting from this knowledge revolution appear to be the greatest critics of Jawaharlal Nehru. All these scientists, who got state-funded education in the IITs, etc., who are now sitting and decorating the West, primarily the United States. They are the ones who are funding Hindutva and attacking Jawaharlal Nehru. That is, when you kick the ladder which you use to climb to the top, it is an insult to those on whose shoulders you have grown. And to use a more colloquial language, it is what is called namak harami. Lastly, those who argue, looking at India from the post-1991 economic reform trajectory, showing that how the growth rates increased a lot after that, and say that if only in 1950s we had adopted the 1991 strategy, where we would have reached. Again, only economists who wear these, what horses are given on the side so that they cannot look on either side, who wear those goggles can say such a thing, who are ahistorical. if in 1950 the 1991 strategy was adopted, that is, if in Nehru's time the Manmohan Singh strategy was adopted, India would most certainly have become a banana republic. Just as in the 1990s, to have the 1950 strategy would be equally idiotic. And it is therefore the Nehruvians who argued for and pushed for economic reforms in the 1990s. Now, this is, in other words, what I'm trying to say is what we witness is a shift from the Nehruvian consensus to a consensus in economic reforms. And that is how it should be seen, rather than a stupid Nehru versus a very bright neoliberal today. We come last to the fourth element, the pro-poor orientation. I think I've already taken a lot of time. Yes. What is in Hindi called Garib Nawazi. For Nehru, and he said it explicitly, political democracy is not enough. Democracy, to be complete, he says, must also be an economic democracy. In his own lifetime, the land reforms was a major effort at an economic democracy. Nearly a 200-year-old system, the zamindari system, was abolished. Its back was broken by 1957 in 7 years' time. And this is what Daniel Thoner, which all of you must have read, one of the biggest experts on the Indian economy, particularly Indian agriculture, he wrote that it is often said that the first three plans ignored Indian agriculture. This is a lie you must have heard, that now that you cannot say that Nehru did not promote industrialization, therefore you say that he neglected agriculture. We had to wait for Lal Bahadur Shastri to do agriculture. Now he says it's a complete lie. This is Daniel Thoner, not me. He says in the first 20 years after independence, that is the Nehruvian years, the first three plans, more was done in Indian agriculture, more change occurred than in the previous 200 years. So apart from just the institutional changes, which were huge, land reforms with democracy, it didn't happen anywhere else. In Japan, it happened with General MacArthur's army. In Russia, it happened through forced collectivization, killing of millions of kulaks. We did not. A land reform with democracy was again a unique phenomenon. So that was achieved. And the institutional basis for the Green Revolution. You could not have had the Green Revolution without dams and electricity and power plants and diesel engines and tractors, all of which was done in the Nehruvian period. Again, planners, experts on the Green Revolution have said that the process of the Green Revolution had started in Nehru's time itself, though it actually grew in the late 60s and 70s. What has happened is, in the area of the pro-poor orientation, I think India has completely abandoned its poor. We have education and health is no longer treated as a public good. It's handed over to the rapacious private sector. You could come, when we came to JNU as students, and now when people get admission, you do not pay. If you're from an economically backward or underdeveloped position, you get a fellowship, you get a scholarship. And I know dozens of students who are first generation learners, often sons of children of agricultural workers, or even rickshaw pullers, would fund their families out of the fellowship that they would get in JNU, right? And that is why we were able to create a university with access to all, across caste, across religion, across region. That is why we had entrance tests in 60 different centers in the country, and with a deliberate effort to go deeper down in the social scale, that is those who are dispossessed. points were given so that they could get admission, and disproves the theory that merit only came with being upper class and upper caste. But that is destroyed. Instead, what do you have now? You have the Ashoka University. I don't know whether you kids know what it costs to get a liberal arts degree, a BA degree, not a engineering or a medical degree. In Ashoka, it costs 50 lakhs, which means it doesn't even belong to this country. The poor are completely abandoned. The same has happened in health. Studies have shown, for example, Nicholas Stern has done a brilliant study. He's compared a part of UP. He did, every 20, 30 years he studied it from 1950s, and the last one was done just a decade ago. And he says that the lot of changes have occurred, but in the area of health is the critical area. He says if one person falls ill, the family may have to sell their lands, and they can be just drop down the class scale to the absolute rock bottom, because you've handed health also over to the rapacious private sector. We go about tom-tomming the number of billionaires that we have. Our press cannot just salivates over the number of billionaires we have at a time while where more than half our children are malnourished. Government studies, not mine. Malnourished, stunted children. We are among the lowest in the world in the global hunger index. We are 111 out of 125 countries in the hunger index. We are below many sub-Saharan countries. We are lower than almost every other South Asian country. We are 111, Bangladesh is 86, Nepal is 69, and Sri Lanka is 60. And we go about saying Vishwaguru and we have billionaires. We have abandoned our poor. And that became evident during Corona, where the poor did not even have the resources to cremate their family members. They would throw them into the river. Or during the lockdown, the whole world was aghast that people in their thousands would walk from, for example, New Delhi all the way to UP and Bihar at 45 degrees temperatures with their families, their belongings, they're old, they're sick, dragging them along. But this visual, is what we need to follow, and not the fobbed up statistics that are fed to us today. The statistics that is given today is that only India has abolished poverty. The latest figures we are citing from the World Bank is that there are only 5% poor left in India. Only 5%. Can you imagine? The World Bank, when you question them, they say, what can we do? We have to rely on government figures. So the government feeds them wrong figures. World Bank calculates on those figures. And then the government says, see, even the World Bank is saying poverty is gone. Use your nose, the smell test, as they say, and you will know whether poverty has gone or not. Why is it that the queues for the Manrega have increased? Why are the unemployment increased? Why are the suicides increased? And we are talking of having got rid of poverty. Lastly, the other element of the idea of India, which has been made a joke of, is the scientific temper. It is Jawaharlal Nehru who coined this term in Discovery of India, which is now a part of our constitution. Article 51A actually says that we must promote the scientific temper. And it is here that the maximum regression has occurred, where top leaders, including our Prime Minister, for example, while inaugurating a hospital in Bombay, where you could see in the audience all the film stars and the famous surgeons which you can recognize. In front of them, he says that in ancient India, we knew plastic surgery. Otherwise, how could Lord Ganesh get an elephant snout? Nobody stood up. Nobody walked out. leave alone protest. Similarly, in Kolkata, the former governor, while inaugurating an engineering fair, look at the irony. While inaugurating an engineering fair, says Arjun in Mahabharata, he had nuclear tipped arrows. There were nuclear bombs in front of his arrows. Right? So we had nuclear technology, we could fly planes in ancient India, we could do plastic surgery, we knew everything. We had no caste system, we had no oppression, all this came with the Muslims. So this complete abandoning of history as a discipline, mythology is equal to history, gods and goddesses become historical figures, is being promoted by the tallest of our country. The governor of Bengal got promoted for this wisdom that Arjun had a nuclear tipped arrow. He became vice president of your country. Is it any wonder then that the state should have promoted, when Corona attack came, the whole country was taken aback by the Corona situation. The state response was Tali. You do talis, you do bajao thali. You have gobar, you have gomutra. You shine mobile torches at the sky and say, Corona, go, Corona, go. I hope you have seen these videos. State-sponsored. And medicines by a favorite yogi of the state, who even the Supreme Court has said that he cannot advertise like that, which claimed to cure unverified medicine, which claimed to cure Corona. Whereas what Jawaharlal Nehru had done years before in the 1950s was set up the National Institute of Virology. It is with that institute, in collaboration with which the Serum Institute of India produced the vaccine, which was one of the largest anti-corona vaccines in the world. So look at this contrast. Our leaders, instead of lifting our people from the mud and filth that was left behind by the British, in Tagore's words, of ignorance, rather than lifting our people from them, our leaders are now pushing our people back into the same mud and filth. The same mud and filth of ignorance, obscurantism, disempowerment, fear, unfreedom, and above all, communal hatred. This threatens not only the survival of democracy, but it threatens the survival of the nation itself. It is pushing us towards civil war, the current situation. Even a person like Harish Khare, you must have know him, and has been the editor of some of the major newspapers of the country, including Hindu. Even he has recently written to the RSS saying, are you aware what kind of forces you are promoting? It will lead to civil war. There are 200 million Muslims in this country who face the threat of being lynched, of bulldozers against them. And as I said, the Punjab and Haryana High Court had called it ethnic cleansing conducted by the state. That is what was happening near Delhi is described by the Punjab and Haryana High Court as ethnic cleansing conducted by the state. Now, this situation is a situation which is very, very dangerous, cannot be taken non-seriously. Gregory Stanton, you may have heard of, is the person, he runs the organization called Genocide Watch. He's the one who predicted the genocide in Rwanda. He has warned in the US congressional briefing, he's predicting, he's saying, seeing what is happening in India, he says he fears that it is the beginnings of by far the world's biggest genocide in history. Let us revisit Gandhi and Nehru to save this wonderful country from this disaster. It is up to the intellectuals and the young people like you to save this huge legacy that is being left behind by our national movement to us. People sacrificed for over a century to build this nation in the manner that it was built. We cannot allow it to go to waste. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a really enlightening lecture. I will quickly move on to the questions that we have been getting from our YouTube live. And if any one of you present here have any questions, you can either raise your hand or type your questions in the chat box. I shall read some questions out. Most of them you have answered already, I feel. But in terms of making a statement also from the people who have been asking these questions, I'll read one of them out. Can we afford to imagine an India without Nehru? Not just in terms of his policies or institutions, but in terms of his ethical imagination of a nation state. And if we strip away that vision, what exactly remains of the Republic? A geographical entity or a morally hollow shell?
Very, very nicely put. You are right that is what I'm arguing as well. That there will be nothing left of the nation. Not only will it be a hollow shell, it would be a hollow shell in which people are fighting and killing each other. A civil war situation. It is if these values are not, by celebrating these values, we are not celebrating some leader just like that. It is celebrating our survival, the survival of this nation. As I said, it is not easy. It was a unique experiment, and that experiment is being tested very severely, and we must fight back.
Right, sir. Next question is, in light of the ruling BJP's sustained critique of Nehru's legacy, particularly its framing of Nehru as responsible for India's alleged strategic, economic and territorial vulnerabilities from Kashmir to China to socialism, how should we critically evaluate this political narrative as a historically grounded reassessment of the past or as a strategic discursive maneuver to delegitimize India's secular modernist foundations in favor of a culturally majoritarian and centralized state vision?
There are lots of points in there, but let me answer one or two of those. You see, the way to counter is to actually study, to look at history. This notion that Nehru is responsible for what has happened in China, what has happened in Pakistan, etc., etc. You go back and see that all the decisions that were taken on China and in Pakistan, did Nehru take them individually? Was even Article 370, was it taken by him? Did the cabinet not agree? Was Shama Prasad not Mukherjee also not present in that? Was Gandhiji not in favor of what he did with Pakistan? So it was, you don't blame another person. If we had a problem with China, what should Nehru have done? They say that Nehru did Hindi Chini bhai bhai, they make fun of it. As if the better strategy would have been to make an enemy out of China, which the current regime has managed to do. Nehru believed in Afro-Asian solidarity. The reason why he wanted to be friends with China, because China was one of the biggest countries in the world, that we needed to be friends if we were to fight imperialism, if we were to fight the superpowers at that time. So it was part of that strategy. And it made absolute good sense, good foreign policy to be friendly with China. Has the current regime been able to make an enemy out of China? Aren't we importing, even when China has supported the Pakistan strikes, as you know, that the felling of our planes was in the recent Operation Sindoor was possible because of Chinese arms and material and technology given to Pakistan. Even then, have we attacked China? Have we even criticized China? Has the Prime Minister not sat on a jhula and swung with the Chinese premier when the Chinese had come into our soil? So it is not it's not, finger pointing is not the answer. The biggest disaster for India would be if we are not friends with China and Pakistan. We have created a situation where not a single of our neighbors, not one, supported us on Operation Sindhu. Not one country in the world came together on our current foreign policy. India has never been so isolated in the world ever. And you're pointing fingers at Nehru, where he could lead 100 countries in the national non-aligned movement, where even his opponents had respect for him. You should hear Churchill's word for Nehru. Described him as the light of Asia. He was able to influence foreign policy globally. The idea of Panchsheel, his move towards nuclear non-proliferation, the idea of peace. I mean, these are important ideas. The idea of non-interference in other people's territories and so on and so forth. So, as I said, the simple solution is to actually read. Nehru, during the Chinese invasion, and the reason why it occurred, as you know, a number of reasons. And one of them is that it was not even connected with India, but it was connected with China's relationship with Soviet Union, but also because Nehru allowed the Dalai Lama to come to India, gave him refuge. Should he not have done that? China was annoyed about that, but should he not have done that? Should the Dalai Lama have been pushed back into China? So, but as I said, it is myopic. We are pushing ourselves into a situation which is, and blaming Nehru for that. This is not the way one studies foreign policy.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to our last question of the evening. When present-day regimes...
I wanted to say another.
Yes.
When the Chinese invasion occurred in India, 1962, there were opposition voices. What did Nehru do? He called a special session of parliament. And by then he was old and he was ailing, he was sick. He died within 2 years of that. And he sat in parliament answering each question. Has the current regime ever allowed anybody to even mention China? Have they allowed anybody to discuss Operation Sindoor? Have they allowed anybody to even talk about Adani? So who are we pointing fingers at? You are pointing fingers at one of the greatest Democrats. If he did anything wrong, he did it openly and in full view of everybody while defending himself. And that was the time for you to build a counter narrative, which you were not able to do. Now is not that when a person has died 50 years, 60 years after that, you want to demonize that person. That is, it's counterfactual, it is stupid. Yes. What is the last question?
Sir, meanwhile, we got a question from our Google Meet itself. Anish has raised a hand. Anish, could you unmute yourself and put the question to sir?
Good evening, sir. It's a highly enriching and a mesmerizing lecture. Sir, my question is why Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru ji failed to prevent the partition of India in 1947 CE, despite his political guru Mahatma Gandhi ji was strongly and stringently against the partition of the Indian subcontinent. And as we all know, sir, that Mahatma Gandhi ji had toured extensively throughout the country to restore communal harmony and prevent the partition of the country. So, sir, can you please enlighten me on this issue?
Yes, you see, as Nehruji himself wrote about, if you read my book, the first section is on Nehru's understanding of history and how history should be looked at. And one thing he said was that do not look at history only on the basis of the rulers, kings and queens and dates and battles, right? That is one reason why all of us ran away from history and people still run away from history. Look at wider forces. The partition is not because of Nehru and Gandhi. The partition is because of the forces that were unleashed by the British from the late 19th century. 1857, Hindus and Muslims fought together to overthrow the British. All these soldiers, including the Brahmin soldiers, your Mangal Pandey, this, that, and the other, all the soldiers who congregated in Delhi, who did they say that should be their emperor? Who should take power? Bahadur Shah Zafar, did they ask the question, ki you are a Muslim? This issue came in with the British. It was there, this thing that Hindus and Muslims were permanently divided. That Hindu trauma, ideology and Hindu-Muslim conflict was a creation of the British. The whole idea of it is your James Mill who writes about Hindu rule and Muslim rule. There was no such notion. Muslim rulers had Hindu generals and Hindu rulers had Muslim generals. As Nehru writes that even this Mahmud of Ghazni, who demolished the Somnath temple, he says that he was not a religious bigot. He was like any other princely person at that time who would overrun the other opponent and loot. And he said that Mahmud of Ghazni, led an army under the generalship of a Hindu general called Tilak to fight in Central Asia, other Muslim countries. So the issue was not Hindu-Muslim, Now, this Hindu-Muslimization was something which was a product of the colonial rule. They introduced elements and they promoted the Muslim League and the communal parties like Hindu Mahasabha, etc. So that the national movement could be weakened. So the partition is a result of that. Partition is a result. I mean, this is absurd when scholars these days say that Gandhi and Nehru are responsible for partition. People who fought with their lives to prevent Hindu-Muslim divide become responsible. This is inversion of history in the worst possible manner. The only people who are not mentioned by the current regime are the British, because they were their lackeys. How come the British are not mentioned for the causing of the partition, or the religious communal parties are not mentioned? It is their ideology. It is Savarkar who talks of two nations. It is Jinnah who talks of two nations. It is not Gandhi and Nehru who are talking of two nations. Why in 1947 partition they had to agree to, with great regret? As you know, Gandhi said that partition shall occur over my dead body, was because under British patronage, the communal situation had been allowed to reach such a peak that the cost at that time of trying to prevent it would have been more bloodbaths. The signal had been given by Jinnah with the Calcutta killings that they will not stop, unless a separate state is created. Now, with that kind of situation, it was not in anyone's hands, and that is why there was a unanimity at that time across people that perhaps it's an evil, but it is a lesser evil to partition the country. And if Gandhiji was alive, his main aim was that even if we are two countries, we should be like brothers. And he was planning to go to Pakistan straight away. That is the way to move. That an unfortunate event has happened. A people who were not divided got divided and formed into two nation states. What in heaven is preventing us, these two nation states, to be again good brothers and like two good brothers? Except the notion of hatred against the other religious community, of which Nehru and Gandhi certainly cannot be accused of. Those who can be accused of that should be held responsible. Ask these questions to them, not to Jawaharlal Nehru. Why did you accept partition?
Thank you, sir. Sir, should we take the final question?
As I said, I like listening. If you ask as many
Okay,
questions.
sir. This will be the final question because we are running short of time. When present-day regimes accuse Nehru of being the architect of India's wrong turn, are they in fact projecting their own discomfort with his commitment to federalism, minority rights, and the refusal to fuse religion with politics? In demolishing Nehru, are they not attempting to unwrite the only ideological alternative that still stands between the Republic and an emerging authoritarian Hindu Rashtra?
Absolutely. Whoever has asked this question has put this very well, very neatly and very precisely. That is absolutely the reason. The reason why they are demonizing Nehru is because the ideology that Nehru represents undercuts completely the direction in which they are moving. I mean, you could not have a more secular, more democratic, more humane person than Nehru, and more, if I may add, more educated. You know, we had at one time an educated prime minister. Can you imagine in these days? Who could write books? Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Does anyone have any more questions from the meet? Okay, then if no one has any more questions, I would like to conclude. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, sir, for that wonderful, wonderful lecture. This is an extremely important discussion that we should all be having and thinking about. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to give a talk. We would love to hear from you again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I wish you all very well. And should you have some bright thoughts later on, you can always get in touch with me either on the email or WhatsApp or whatever.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much.
Good night, sir.
Good night.